Hi, I'm Seth from Red Eye Garage, and today we're going to convert this rear Dana 41 axle from 9-inch drums to disc brakes. Ta-da! We're done already. Although this is a really easy job, it's not quite that easy. But I really want to keep my video to the point and just give you the info you need. So we're going to start at the end for this video. And the reason I'm doing that is because this job is so easy. A lot of you will just need one little tip and the rest is self-explanatory. The instructions are not super detailed, and that's because it's a really easy job, but there's one specific thing that they mention in there that they said is a really common issue for many people, and it happened to be an issue I ran into. So I thought, why not skip a lot of this and give it to you right off the bat. So bolting the calipers on, installing the pads and brake lines, you can figure that out. And it will be covered in the end of this video, which is a pretty long video because I want it to be very thorough. But really the only thing that will trip you up, which tripped me up too, and it said in the instructions it would be possibly a problem, is that you get everything together and you go to put the calipers on, and this outer shoe or pad won't fit in because it's like the rotor's out too far. And in there it gives you a really detailed way to measure to make sure the hub is going on all the way. And in my opinion, that's not the main issue. It's very unlikely, unless you have the wrong hub, that it's not going to seat on all the way. So the problem is actually in the way your axle is stacked. Because I measured a couple of them I had sitting around here. And so I'm going to cover that right now. I'm going to give you a way to measure everything when you kind of mock it up, so you don't have to go through this involved measuring the hub. I had to take the bearing off, blah, blah, blah. You'll see it in this video. But I would just want to give you something. You can take a tape measure and throw it over your axle and see where you're at. And then I'll tell you a little more detail on how to correct it if that's your issue. So in my opinion, this is what really matters as to whether or not you're going to have rotor alignment issues. I'm going to give you 3 different measurements. I'm going to give you an overall, and then I'm going to give you one from both sides at the hub. So if you can see here, it doesn't matter if your caliper brackets are on or not. You just need the hub flange bolted to the axle, snugged up and torqued properly, and all the brake parts removed from the drum stuff. Then I'm just pulling a tape across the edge here. If you notice, there's no way to do this without flexing the tape measure. So this is a flexible tape, but what I'm going to do here is put a square right on the front edge of the hub. So I'm flat on the hub face, and I'm trying not to bend the tape measure. And I know this isn't going to be exact as you would with a micrometer, but I have 49 7/8 overall. And I can guarantee you if you're any amount over that, your caliper alignment isn't going to be right, and your pads and caliper won't slide down there. So if you want to get a friend with a square on the other side, that'd be good too. 49 7/8. So that's our overall measurement. Now I'm going to get a measurement on that hub and this hub, and I'll show you why that's important. All right, for this next step, I'm going to measure from the back of the hub flange to the back of the axle flange, which will be the same as, you know, this caliper bracket butts right up against there. So you can measure this without all that stuff there. It'd actually be a little bit easier, but I'm just showing you from here. So I'm getting a depth measurement. Should be able to get very accurate with this. I'm going right to the front edge of the axle flange. So that's from this inside edge to that inside edge. You could also take the measurement here. It's going to give you the same measurement. But I'm just doing it right here, and there it is. So I have 2 inches, 835 thousandths, so 2835. That's on the driver's side. Let's go check the passenger side. Passenger side, I'm going to take the same exact measurement. They will likely not be the same. All right, the other side I have 2937, so quite a bit of difference there, and that's the issue. So what's going to happen now is I'm going to put this outer brake pad, that's this smaller one, I'm going to set it down in the caliper where it belongs, and the caliper ears go on the back side of this bracket, just like that. And I'm gonna go to slide this on there, and I'm gonna be like, it won't fit. The caliper's too, or the rotor's too far out that way. And that's because this side is shimmed out almost 100 thousandths pushed this way more than the other side. And it's just not gonna go on there. I took everything apart, I removed a shim, moved everything that way. I checked my end play on the axle. You want to keep it, I probably wouldn't go less than 5 to 7 thousandths, but check your manual for your axle. So you want to keep the minimum end play, minimum amount of shims, and keep your axle as close together as you can. Then come back in and test fit it. And now the caliper will slide over that. So the trick here is to get your end play correct while keeping everything as narrow as possible, because it'd be better for this to slide on there very easily and have a little extra slop that way than it is to have to force this on there. So you're just gonna have to play with that. Now I've moved back over to the driver's side. I have my end play set correctly. I've moved this as far in as I can while keeping the correct end play. And now that caliper slides right on there, no problem. There's plenty of movement. So that is critical. Once you get that step done, you're good to go. This is a very well put together kit, very simple assembly, but you have to have the end play, the shim stack, and the alignment of the axles just right. So I understand this is a rather unconventional start to a how-to video. We're starting at the end, but for most of you, now with that information, you can just go and install it. So if you want to stick around for the entire step-by-step video, and I'll show the exact instructions, you know, one at a time, and show you how to measure this a little more accurately. My goal with these videos is to get you out on the trail and on the road safely, and spend less time in the shop watching videos. So hopefully that helps most of you. And if you'd like to stick around, I'd love you to watch the whole video, and we'll go into more about the stack and the seals and the brackets and all that. But I just really wanted to get those common issues addressed quickly and get you back on the trail. On to the rest. For this job, I'm starting with a spare Dana 41 out of a CJ2A. For the purpose of this video, I just have it sitting on my shop floor. It's going to be easier for me to show you what's going on and just be able to get the camera in there and give you some good shots. We're going to start with the axle stripped down as you see it now. So I already pulled the hubs and the backing plates off, and this is kind of the starting point. I have other detailed videos on how to remove the hubs, so make sure you get an HP600 Puller from Kaiser Willys if you don't have one already. That's a must-have for every Willys owner, so make sure you have that. Pop your hubs off, remove your backing plates, and then we can get started. To do this job, we'll be using parts from Kaiser Willys' rear disc brake conversion kit. When you open the box, you'll find everything you need. So you have the rotors, caliper brackets, calipers, all the hardware for the pads and for the brackets comes with the kit. You'll also get new wheel studs, a brand new set of brake pads, flex hoses, and the spacer brackets that go on the axle flanges. You'll also get a set of detailed instructions with pictures and measurements. I will cover everything included in this packet in this video. Before I disassemble everything and start putting the brake parts on, I want to check the axle shaft end play. So you can get a dial indicator set up however you prefer. I use an old hub and I snug it up just enough so that the hub's not moving on the shaft. And then you can check your bearing preload or the end play of the shaft. You want it right around 7 thousandths, but it's good to get an idea of what it's at before you put it back together. And I'll make a note of the shim thickness on both sides as well as the end play. Once you remove the bolts that hold everything together, you're going to have a series of shields, seals, and gaskets. Anytime you take your axle apart, I recommend replacing these. These are serviceable items that get pretty gross over time. And behind some of these gaskets, there will be shims. So this is the shim stack for this axle. If you notice, the shims are larger than the outer race of the bearing, so that's what allows this plate to press against the bearing and give you that proper preload. I took a few minutes with a wire wheel and cleaned up this flange. It was pretty crusty just from water and dirt and time. And also, this would be a good time if you want to pull the axle out, clean or replace this bearing, and re-grease it. You also really want to make sure the back side of the flange is clean and clear from rust and grime, because the bracket is going to sit flat against this. So I had a lot of grease and rust right here. It'd also be a good time to clean and paint your axle tube. And then if you see right here, there's a pretty big burr from something hitting the axle that sticks out here. You want this to be completely flat. So I'd file that down and make sure this is nice and smooth. Just make sure you have a good flat surface. The axle is completely prepped and ready for brackets, but we might as well get all the prep work done so we can just reassemble. So the next step will be to prep the hub. We will be reusing the axle hub, but we have to remove the studs and drum. So that is done by pressing these studs out. So let's do that next. Depending on what your Jeep has gone through in its life, there are two different ways that you may need to remove the stud. If it has a traditional style stud in it, you can just hammer it or put it in a press and drive it out. If it has swaged studs, like an original style hub, that means you will have to cut the swage. There are expensive tools for doing that, but one trick I've found over the years is to just take a 5/8 hole saw, remove the pilot bit, and the stud will act as a perfect pilot, and you just use your drill and cut a little bit of the swedge off and pound it through. You don't want to cut into the hub, so make sure you're only taking off as little material as needed to get through the bulge on the stud, and then it'll drive right through. Please double check what type of stud you have, because if you try to press out a stud that's swaged in, you'll damage the drum and possibly bend the hub. On this particular hub, one of the studs was probably replaced because it was broken or damaged, and it was not swaged in. It was just pressed in like a modern stud. But the rest of them have that bulge I was talking about. So we're going to take our 5/8 hole saw and just start cutting. It's less than 1/8 of an inch usually. You'll see usually some rust dust will start to come out when you've cut down far enough. So you saw just a couple of revolutions with the cutter, and I could see a change in the chip, and I don't want to damage the hub, so I'm going to just stop there. Once you make that cut, just take a good hammer. They usually come out easy enough that you don't have to back it up with anything. In this particular case especially, I'm not worried about reusing the drum because we're switching to disc brakes. Just go through each one of these and punch them through. Once you've hammered all 5 studs out, your hub will no longer be connected to the drum, and I would recommend cleaning this up and getting it ready to go on the axle. This kit comes with 10 new studs, and these are modern, traditional style press-in stud, and they are all right-hand thread. So we're no longer attaching anything to the hub the way the drum was held in place by the stud, because the rotors for this kit are slip-on style rotors. As with any mechanical job, there's always multiple different ways to do this. I have a press, and you can definitely press these studs in. I found it faster and just as effective to use this old school method, and I'm pretty sure everyone has this, so I try to do things in a way that works for everyone, because not all of us have the same tools in our shop, but you will most likely have 5 impact sockets or any kind of tubing that is the same size. So this is the back side of the rotor, so I'm just dropping the studs down through the holes. This is not rocket science. So you could put it in the press and press them down, or you could now just take a hammer and send them home. You really don't have to hit it that hard. It's going to want to jump around on you. And make sure you're right over your socket. So I'm using like a 2-pound hammer, and you can see I'm not going full bore on it. I have one left. You'll kind of hear and feel a change when it gets seated all the way. So it'll go from like a hollow sound to a solid thump. These instructions are clear, but really quite simple. There's only 3 pages and nothing too technical. It does make a note here that says the most common problem is rotor alignment. And that, according to this, is because a lot of the hubs aren't seated correctly. It said in pretty much every instance, the only issue was because the hub wasn't seated onto the axle properly. Because of that, I want to make sure that I cover how to check that. They show you in the manual, but we'll do it here in the shop just to give you a better visual of what possibly the issue. So in order to do that, we need to pull the axle out of the tube. You wouldn't have to do this unless you have a rotor alignment issue. You might have to pull this out, but I do want to cover how to take those measurements. So I got my slide hammer hooked up here. We're going to pop this axle out of the tube and take those measurements. More than likely, if you haven't just done a bearing job, if I was going to put this axle in my Jeep, I would definitely not only clean this up, but probably replace these bearings. When you're this far in, it's pretty easy and cheap to do this correctly and make sure you'll have good long life out of your axle so you don't have to tear back into it. So you can see this bearing, although it could probably be cleaned up and be just fine. If you're taking the axle out anyway, if your bearings are questionable, now would be a great time to replace them. So I need to clean up this area because we're going to take our measurement off of this, the little flange that stops the bearing. So we need to be able to get a micrometer or something to measure down in there. It's always my goal in these videos to show you an honest depiction and review of what I'm doing. I'm going to do it the way the book says because I want to show you the correct way, but we're going to try to find a way around taking this measurement a different way so that you don't have to tear it apart to this point. So to do this correctly, you will have to press this bearing off because the measurement taken is from the front edge of this flange, and with the bearing on there, it's really hard to get that measurement. So what I'm going to do is take a measurement the way the instructions tell us. I'm going to make sure I know the hub's going on all the way, and then I'm going to get you a cheater measurement with the axle and bearing still installed in the tube so that you don't have to press this bearing off and risk damaging it and putting it back on and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to try to help you out while still doing it correctly. I'm over here on the bench now, and this is the easy measurement. Just find a flat surface, and we're going to measure from this top edge to your flat surface. So I'm just using a dial micrometer or a dial caliper and just taking a nice flat measurement off the edge, and I got 2, 5, 14. So 2 inches, 514 thousandths. So we're going to write that number down and take another measurement. The next measurement we need to take is between this bearing shoulder, like the surface that stops the bearing, and the back of the hub. So for this, I'm going to again use my dial caliper and just take a good measurement. I do have a nut on here, and I cranked this tight, so we will need the puller to pop it apart again. So just do your best to get an accurate measurement. 1 inch, 380 thousandths. All right, so there's our 2 measurements, and now we just add them together. So it's 3.894. So now let's take a look at our instruction booklet. So the tolerance is 3.78 to 3.85. So we're a tiny bit over. So what I might do is crank on that a little more with the impact gun and see if I can get a little bit smaller measurements, but I'm really close. I'm right at the top range of that measurement. We're back here at the high-tech drawing board. I put the old Milwaukee on it and really cranked it down, and I got 1.35 0.055. So you can see there, I gained, what is that, 25 thousandths just by really probably put 150 foot-pounds on it with the impact gun, which is more realistic to what it should be torqued to when your final assembly occurs. So that's a good indication that if you don't have it torqued well enough, your rotor alignment could be off. So let's cross out that new one, and now we have 3.869. Sorry, it's a little hard to write on this mat. Okay, so now let's check our paper one more time with our new number. So as you can see, according to the book, we are still over the maximum tolerance allowed for this measurement. So there's two things we can do, which is to try to get the hub to seat on a little farther, but also change the shim stack, moving the axle in as much as possible while keeping that proper end play. So now I'm going to put the hub puller back on this, pull the hub off, press the bearing back on. All right, we're almost back to where we started. I got the bearing pressed back on, and I'm putting it back in the axle. I cleaned it up and got a little oil on it. Using a brass hammer, just tap the race back in, a little bit of oil on it, and we should be back to where we started. I'm really hoping that this is the true last time of the day that I will put this hub back on. Okay, so that's approximately how tight it's going to be when it's on the vehicle. This is important that you make sure this race is tapped in as far as it needs to go to get a real correct measurement here. If you want to put all the shims and the dust shields and stuff back on, you can, but I don't think you'll have to just for this measurement. So now I'm going to take a dial caliper right off the back of this flange to the back of this flange and take a measurement, because you can do that easily without having to pull the bearing. And I come up with 2,945, so 2 inches, 945 thousandths. And that will prevent you from having to do everything I just did. So I know this has been a long-winded, long journey, but it said that's really important in the instructions. And as I said, I really didn't like the way they did that. It was definitely the most accurate way to measure that, but not the most practical. And more than likely, most of you won't even need to do that. So I'd hate for you to take that apart, take your bearing off, and do all that just to come up with this measurement that I just took there. Thank you for bearing with me on that section of this video. I know that was probably more detailed than most people will need, but considering they said it's the most common issue that can arise, I really wanted to cover it in here. So if it helps just one person, that's good in my book. So now let's move on and do the fun part. Let's install some shiny new parts. Once you get to this point, or if you're starting from this point without having to take those measurements, I think this is going to be a really easy assembly. So if you notice, the bracket has a bend like this. So that goes outward. It'll slide right over the axle tube, just like that. Then you're going to rotate it until the holes line up. It said they're angled towards the back of the vehicle, and the passenger side, which is the side that we're on right now, is around the 10 o'clock position. So 9 o'clock would be right here, 10 o'clock is there. In the kit, you're going to get 2 different bolt lengths. All the bolts that go through the caliper bracket and the axle flange will be this longer bolt with this, the little shank on it. And then the shorter bolt is for the one that doesn't go through the caliper bracket. So if you have them in the correct position, they'll all protrude on the outside to the same length. So if you see one that looks like this, you have the wrong bolt in that hole. So make sure the long ones go through the caliper, and the short one, there's a gap here where it slides over the tube. That goes through just the axle flange. All right, so the order will be caliper bracket, axle flange, then the original shims. I'm putting the same shims I had on before back on there. Then you'll put on your bearing plate. This is the piece that pushes the bearing race back. Then these 2 half moon spacers, these take the place of the original backing plate as per the instructions. Then a gasket. Then the grease seal. Then the larger outer gasket. Obviously, if you were rebuilding this, you would put new gaskets in. This is just for demonstration purposes. Then the dust shield. It's a lot of stuff. And then start the nuts. So I'm going to put all 6 of these on here and snug it up. Now we're cooking with gas. So we're going to install the hub, and then we're almost done. So now we're going to use the tapered key. So make sure, I've said before in other videos, that the taper is down and towards the differential housing. So that prevents that hub splitting out that I talked about earlier. So I found the best way is to set the hub on, line the key up with the axle, and then I like to take my brass hammer and just tap it into place. This prevents you from putting it in wrong, because you'll know very quickly that you have it in wrong. So you can tap the hub in. Be careful not to mess up the threads. I always like to use brass. Now I know that nut's not going to force that key in and split that hub. So then we put a washer on and the nut, and torque it to 110 foot-pounds is what the instruction book says. There, it starts getting fun and starts to look like we're accomplishing something. So as I said before, these are slip-on rotors, which is super nice. So when the wheel goes on there and you torque the lug nuts up, that's what actually holds the rotor in place. So in the event you have to service this or repair the rotor, you don't have to press these studs out again. So here's what it will look like completely installed. I'll show you the orientation of the brake pads next. The kit will come with a short pad and a long pad. The long pad goes inboard towards the differential, and the pin will pass through that, and that's what holds it in place. And then the short pad goes in the front, and it's just captured on the caliper mount by those 2 little tabs. Here's a view from the rear. So this bushing slides in the caliper, and this pin has a threaded portion, and it will thread into here. There's a zinc coating or some sort of galvanizing on this bracket, which makes the threads a little sticky. So I'd recommend putting some oil or anti-seize on them, and then just don't use an impact gun. Use a ratchet or a big Allen wrench, and just run them in and out a little bit, because mine were a little bit tight, but once that coating scrapes off of them, they'll be just fine. Here you can see the taller pad captured by the pin and the shorter pad right here. So now this will slide this way as this outer pad wears. This pad's so far from the rotor right now because the piston's not pushed out. So when the piston gets pushed out, it will pinch it like that. There is a right and a left to the calipers. Always make sure the bleeder is at the highest portion of the piston, so that's how you can easily determine between right and left. Passenger side is done. Now we're going to repeat the exact same steps on the driver's side. Ta-da, took 3 seconds. Thanks to the wonders of technology, I was able to do this side in the amount of time it took me to walk over here. So I edited that out for you. Exact same procedure, it went smoothly. It's just a mirror copy of the other side, and it came out very nice. Here's what the complete axle looks like. These brakes are way too nice for this axle. The very last step would be to add the brake hoses, and this is sort of your personal preference. I've done a few of these rear disc swaps now at this point, and I'm just going to thread this in here temporarily. What I like to do is, obviously it'll have to be mounted in the vehicle, is your hose goes on here. You got to clear the leaf spring and the suspension, but I like to come back here and weld a tab on the axle that will clip into this, but really you can run it up to the frame if you want to have flex hoses, but I like kind of keeping the single line to the frame just as it was from the factory. So weld a little tab with a hole in it large enough for this to slide through, and then hook up your factory hard line. Usually all you have to do is shorten it and put a new flare on it, and it'll tap right into that. So that's how you install the disc brake kit from Kaiser Willys onto your Dana 41 or 44. Now, you know it wouldn't be a Red Eye Garage video without a chair chat, so let's get into it. So in the beginning of the video, we did all those measurements with the hub and the bearing surface. It was quite a bit of work to get that. I hope that helped you. I noticed with this axle, there was a lot of shims on one side and very few shims on the other. So with drum brakes, that doesn't matter. So what was happening is the end play was correct, but it was shifted to one side. And when those axles meet together, you know, they actually are just about touching, and if you have it shimmed wrong, they will touch. So what was happening was my axles were shifted to one side, so the caliper was tight on one side and loose on the other. So I had to change my shim stack around while maintaining the right end play. It's a little tricky, but you need to keep them centered. So if you have them shifted to one side, which might have been fine with drum brakes, but with this it's not going to work. So don't freak out and think your hub's bad or something, or your bearings are bad. Check your shims. If you have way more on one side than the other, that's likely your problem. From the factory, the axles are probably shimmed and centered correctly, but who knows what's happened to this axle or the one you're working on. So I'm just trying to give you little tips to save you some time and headaches. So using those measurements I had will help, but I would mainly check to make sure your axles are centered, your end play is correct, then the calipers should drop right on, and you should be stopping on a dime in no time. As always, thanks for watching. Be sure to use code REDEYEGARAGE10 at KaiserWillys.com. Catch you later.